My name's Ethan, I'm 28, and I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. My older brother, Mark, lives in Cheyenne, and a few times a year we meet up to go camping. We picked a remote spot in Wyoming, public land near a cliff overlooking a wide valley because we wanted peace and a clear sky. We arrived late Saturday afternoon, no cell signal, the temperature dropping fast and a steady wind blowing up from the valley. We set up the tent a good distance from the edge, hammered in extra stakes because of the gravelly soil, and organized our food and water. I usually handle the stove while he sets up the clothes line and checks the ground. No other cars nearby, no other campfires in sight. The plan was simple: have a quick dinner, sleep early, and wake before sunrise. Everything felt normal, just the sound of the wind and the hiss of the stove. The new tent barely made a sound, the tarp stretched tight. The air smelled of cold dirt and fuel, nothing else. Around 10 p.m., while the water was heating, we started hearing laughter, faint, distant, coming from up the slope above us, somewhere beyond the ridge and out of sight. At first we figured it was just other campers arriving late. It happens. We kept chatting about the weather and the morning trail until we noticed the laughter getting closer and stopping every time we stopped talking. I said, "Maybe they're lost." And a few seconds later the same phrase echoed back, almost identical, but with the tone wrong, like someone repeating it from memory. Mark and I looked at each other. The wind kept blowing, the stove hissing, and then the sound stopped for about a minute. I turned off the stove to listen, and the silence that followed felt heavy, only the faint flap of the tent zipper breaking it. Mark pointed his flashlight toward the slope, but the beam faded before the ridge. Nothing. We stood there listening until the wind rose again and covered everything. After a few minutes, we tried to shake it off and went back to cooking. Mark joked it was probably drunk teenagers trying to scare us. We laughed, but the laughter died fast. The voices came back, this time closer, mixed with a dry, crackling noise like radio interference. They were repeating things we'd said minutes before. "Must be the wind. Turn off the light." Each repetition carried a faint echo, dragged out unnaturally. The tone of the voices was wrong, the pronunciation slightly off. We went inside the tent and zipped it closed, each pretending to stay calm. The wind pressed against the fabric in uneven bursts, and it felt like something was moving around outside. The tarp snapped softly, and now and then we heard tiny crunches, pebbles being kicked. My watch showed 11:58 p.m. when the first loud sound came, a rock tumbling down the slope. It hit another, then landed hard on the ground near the camp. It happened twice more, each time rolling from above in short intervals. Mark switched off his light and whispered that if it were people, we'd have heard them talking or laughing normally by now. I didn't answer. A little after midnight, the wind died completely. No sounds, not even insects or the faint river below. Then came the noise of stone scraping, like someone slowly pushing a rock with their foot right above where we were. The laughter returned, short, spaced out, coming now from different directions, one to the left, another behind us, higher up. They weren't cheerful laughs, they sounded mimicked, forced, all ending the same way with a strangled rasp. Mark gripped his knife and I held my trekking pole, knowing neither would help much if it was an animal. Then the crunch of gravel started sliding down fast, like someone was running on the slope. The tent trembled slightly as pebbles hit the tarp. I aimed the flashlight toward the noise, and for a split second I thought I saw movement, a hunched shape between the rocks, before it vanished when the light hit. Mark grabbed my arm and whispered, "There's more than one." His voice caught in his throat. I switched off the light and we stood still, listening. The sound stopped again, completely suddenly, as if whatever it was had realized we were aware of it. The night dragged endlessly. Every time we started to relax, another sound came, something heavy sliding, small rocks rolling on their own, and once, a sharp crack from the opposite side of the cliff, like a branch snapping underfoot. We didn't dare go outside. We just sat back to back, listening to the fabric of the tent shudder. I could swear I heard footsteps circling us, slow, spaced out, as if someone were walking around the camp. The worst part was that the steps always stopped on the cliffside where the ground wasn't stable enough for anyone to stand. When the first light of dawn appeared, fear turned into a kind of numbness. We crawled out of the tent, bodies stiff, eyes burning from staying awake. The ground around us was covered in footprints, huge, distorted ones, deep heels and elongated toes, like something barefoot had circled the campsite for hours. They surrounded the extinguished fire pit and led straight to the cliff's edge, stopping exactly there. No return prints, no sign of anything climbing back up. I stepped closer and felt a damp wind rising from the valley below. Nothing visible, just the faint rush of distant water. Mark stayed silent, studying the prints. He placed his foot inside one. The empty space around it was massive, nearly double the size. The tracks crossed each other in strange directions, as if whatever it was had walked around us again and again. In the middle of the pattern, we found small stones stacked in pairs, forming a line leading toward the cliff. It sent a chill through me. Neither of us remembered touching those stones during the night. We followed the line to where the last footprint stopped, inches from the drop. Mark knelt, examined it, and said quietly, without looking up, "There's no sign of sliding. It stopped here and disappeared." That sentence echoed in my head the entire way back to the car. We didn't speak while packing up or driving off. Only once we were back on the road did Mark finally say, still staring straight ahead, "Those voices that copied us, one of them said my name." After that, we never camped near cliffs again, and every time I hear the sound of stones rolling down a trail, my body locks up, like I'm back in that tent all over again. Story 2. My wife and I rented that house in Outer Banks, North Carolina, for a weekend getaway. Just the two of us, away from everything. It was a small wooden beach house, pale-colored, facing the ocean. We arrived in the late afternoon, unloaded the car, and went for a short walk on the sand before dark. The sound of the waves was constant. The breeze carried salt and seaweed in the air. There were no nearby houses. The closest was about 300 meters away, and the access road was just soft sand. The plan was simple: 2 days of rest, no phones, no internet, just us and the ocean. The night started peacefully. We made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the porch for a while watching the dark horizon. Around 11, we went to bed. The bedroom faced the sea with a big window and thin curtains that let the porch light through. I woke to the sound of soft knocking, 3 slow taps, like someone gently tapping a finger on the outer wall. It was a little past 2 in the morning. I stayed still, listening, trying to tell if it was just the wind or something structural. The wood creaked here and there, but the knocks were too steady to be random. I got up quietly so I wouldn't wake my wife and went to the window. The curtain moved slightly from the breeze, and outside, the porch was lit by the yellowish glow of the spotlight. The sound of the waves blended with that faint tap-tap coming from the side of the house, just beyond the reach of the light. I stood there, trying to figure out if it was something loose hitting the wall. Then I heard footsteps, slow, in the sand. The sound was muffled, but the rhythm was clear. 2 steps, pause, 2 steps, pause. My whole body tensed. When I called my wife, the knocking stopped. She came to the window and asked if I'd heard it too. Before I could answer, we saw a figure walking along the sand, right at the edge of the porch light. It was hard to make out details. It looked like someone wearing light clothes, maybe a shirt and long pants, pacing back and forth along the same stretch of beach. What was strange was that they weren't looking at the sea or at the house, just walking, turning, and walking again, like they were measuring the distance. We watched for a few minutes without saying anything. When I thought about turning on another light, the figure suddenly stopped. That stillness made my skin crawl. It was like they knew we were watching. I waited for them to move, to turn, bend, leave, but nothing. They just stood there on the sand, with the dark sea behind them. After a few seconds, they started walking again, but this time toward the house. The porch light reached only halfway down the beach, and when the figure entered that circle of light, I saw they were barefoot. That detail sent a chill through me. Their skin looked too pale and their posture was stiff, every step deliberate. I ran to turn on the side floodlight, and the instant I did, the figure froze, just a few meters from the house. I tried to reason it out, maybe a lost neighbor, maybe drunk, but it made no sense. There were no bars, no roads nearby, just miles of sand. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" My voice carried in the wind, but the figure didn't respond. It stood there for a few seconds, then silently turned sideways and walked out of the light toward the ocean. I waited to hear footsteps, splashing, something. But there was nothing. Just the constant crash of the waves on the shore. We shut the window and locked the front door, though the lock was flimsy, more decorative than functional. We sat in silence, listening to every sound outside. The knocking started again, but this time it came from another spot, closer to the headboard. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Always the same rhythm. My wife began to cry softly, saying she wanted to leave right then. I kept trying to think of a logical explanation. Maybe someone lost. Maybe the wind knocking a branch. But nothing fit the precise human rhythm that echoed through the wood. Around 4 in the morning, the sound stopped completely. The silence that followed was almost worse. We stayed awake until sunrise, too afraid to open the curtains. When the light finally started coming through the cracks, the tension eased a little. I went out first. The morning air was cold, the sand damp with dew. What I saw made me freeze. Bare footprints leading from the ocean to the porch. Some were half erased by the tide, but others were clear, deep. I followed the line with my eyes and felt a chill when I realized the prints stopped right at the edge of the house. None went back. The footprints ended less than a meter from the porch, as if someone had stood there watching the house for a while. The sand was slightly sunken in spots, like they'd stayed still for minutes. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe someone got lost on the beach, maybe a fisherman out early. But what unsettled me most was the total absence of return prints. It was as if the person had come from the sea, stopped there, and vanished. I went back inside and brought my wife out to see. She stared silently for a moment, then said something that made my stomach drop. "Look, the footprints are wet." And she was right. The marks were glistening in the morning light, still moist, as if they'd been made just minutes ago. But the tide was receding at that hour. There was no way someone could have come from the sea. That was the moment I decided we wouldn't spend another night there. We packed up, and before leaving, I looked once more toward the beach. The sand was empty, the ocean calm. But for a brief second, I could have sworn there was something standing in the shadow beneath the lower deck, watching. Story 3. I was 16 years old at the time, living with my mom in a small house on the outskirts of Omaha, Nebraska. She worked the night shift at a hospital and usually left around 9 p.m. I'd always leaving dinner ready and the landline phone in the kitchen in case I needed anything. It was an old 2-story house, and the phone was one of those wall-mounted corded ones, the kind that made a loud click when you took it off the hook. That night it was raining hard, thunder rolling in long intervals between sheets of rain hitting the windows. I was upstairs playing on the computer when the phone rang. I looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Odd. Nobody ever called that late. I ran downstairs, the ringing echoing through the empty house. When I answered, I heard my mother's voice. She sounded calm, almost casual. "Hey, honey, I just got here. Can you come downstairs?" A chill ran up my spine instantly. I would have heard her car pulling in since the garage was right below my room. My throat went dry. "Are you really here?" I asked. The voice replied, identical to hers. "Yes, I'm downstairs. Come here." The line was perfectly clear, no background noise, as if she were speaking from another room. I set the phone down and started descending slowly, listening for any sound below. The whole house was dark except for the faint kitchen light. I called out to her once, twice. No answer. The rain outside drowned everything, and the living room clock ticked toward midnight. The silence inside felt wrong, like the house itself was waiting. I walked into the kitchen, and the first thing I noticed was the small rug by the back door, soaked, as if someone had come in from the rain. But the door was locked, chain-latched, everything in place. I stepped back, heart pounding, and looked toward the stairs. I knew I was alone, but couldn't make myself believe it. Then the phone rang again. I ran to answer and glanced at the caller ID. The number on the screen was our own. I remember the blood draining from my face. I picked up anyway, voice shaking, and on the other end came the same calm breathing, identical to my mother's. Before I could speak, the voice said again, this time impatiently, "I told you to come downstairs." I pressed the receiver to my ear and said I knew she was still at the hospital. The silence that followed was worse than any reply. No click, no static, just the faint sound of someone breathing close to the microphone. I dropped the phone and bolted upstairs, slamming and locking my bedroom door. The sound of rain seemed distant now, muffled, and for a while everything went still. I tried to rationalize, maybe a line glitch, maybe someone tapping the phone system, but nothing made sense. Then, in the middle of that suffocating quiet, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, spaced out. Each one made the wood creak exactly the way it did when my mom came up. I froze on the floor, staring at the doorknob. With every step, the feeling grew stronger. Something was getting closer. When the steps reached the top, they stopped. The clock read 12:12 a.m. I waited, holding my breath. Then the phone rang again. But this time, the sound came from inside my room. The cord was unplugged from the wall, yet the phone was vibrating on the desk, ringing. I stared at it, still moving on its own, the ring now a low, continuous hum. I picked it up and threw it to the floor. The sound stopped instantly. I stood there, heart hammering, listening to the faint wind against the window. I told myself it had to be a short circuit, some electrical feedback, something that made sense. Then the wooden stairs creaked again. One step, then another. Someone was coming up. This time, the steps didn't stop at the top. I heard the floorboards in the hallway groan closer and closer to my room. They stopped right outside the door. The air inside was freezing, cold enough that I could see my breath. I waited what felt like minutes until a soft scratching began on the door, a faint sound like fingernails brushing the wood. I didn't open it. I sat on the floor staring at the gap beneath the door, and for less than a second I saw a dark shadow move past it. I couldn't move. The rain outside sounded far away now, like the world had sealed itself beyond that door. I stayed silent, and eventually the shadow disappeared. After a while, the footsteps went back down the stairs, slow, fading, until they were gone. The clock read 2:30 a.m. when I finally managed to breathe again. I spent the rest of the night awake, back against the wall, the phone still lying disconnected on the floor. The next morning, I told my mom everything. She swore she hadn't called me once. Her phone had been dead since the start of her shift. Before leaving for school, I checked the landline again and saw the cord completely out of the socket, hanging loose. Yet the call log still showed an entry at 2:17 a.m. A call made from our own number. After that night, I never slept upstairs again. Story 4. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to a sound coming from outside the trailer, light footsteps alternating between gravel and hard ground, as if someone were walking around slowly. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 3:04 a.m. The silence of the Utah desert was so complete, I could hear the ticking of the engine cooling down. My wife was asleep beside me, completely still. At first I thought it was the wind, but the steps had rhythm, pauses, and continuity. I lay there, my heart beating faster with every sound. I got up slowly and went to the small side window. Outside, the night looked dense, lit only by a single lamppost on the far side of the rest area. The glass reflected part of the trailer's interior, and for a split second, in that reflection, I saw a silhouette standing behind me. Tall, motionless, near the sink. I turned so fast I hit my shoulder on the wall, but there was no one there. Only the curtain swaying slightly in the cold air from the vent. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The fear slowly turned into that awful feeling of being watched, even though I was alone. I listened for any sound, but there was nothing except the faint hum of the generator. I walked to the sink and looked toward the bathroom mirror, but the weak night light made everything hazy. I opened the trailer door carefully and looked outside. The ground around us seemed untouched. No sign of movement. Still, the air felt different. Cold, still, like everything was holding its breath. I shut the door, locked it twice, and went back to bed, telling myself it had just been a reflection from outside. When the first light of day came, I opened the curtain and froze. There were footprints in the damp dirt surrounding the trailer. They circled the whole vehicle and stopped right at the door. I crouched to look closer. They were human footprints, barefoot, deeper at the toes, as if whoever made them had been standing on tiptoe, trying to look inside. My stomach twisted. I ran back in to wake my wife and show her, and that's when I noticed the handprints on the bathroom mirror. They were large, pressed from the inside out, as if someone had touched the glass from behind. My wife went pale immediately. We stood there for minutes in silence, staring at them. They didn't look recent, but they definitely hadn't been there the night before. I remembered cleaning that mirror when I washed my face before bed. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably condensation, but when I wiped the glass, the marks didn't come off easily. It was as if someone with cold hands had pressed there for a long time. We left soon after breakfast, but before starting the engine, I noticed something near the lock. Fine scratch marks around the keyhole. They weren't old damage. The metal was freshly scraped, like someone had tried to twist it open with something improvised. The fear that hit me then was more physical than rational. My hands trembled, my breathing turned shallow, and the air felt heavier somehow. I started the car without saying a word. And it wasn't until we were back on the highway that I realized I was still clutching the rag I'd used to wipe the mirror. We drove in silence for nearly an hour. The sun was rising, but the unease didn't fade. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone following us. When we finally stopped at a gas station, I told the attendant what had happened, even the part about the reflection. The old man just shook his head slowly and said that the rest area we'd stayed in had been closed years ago, after several reports of people being watched at night. He didn't elaborate. That night, we stopped at a campground surrounded by other travelers. I avoided looking at the bathroom mirror, but before bed, I noticed it looked cleaner. The handprints were gone. Still, every time the wind hits the trailer's metal walls, I feel that same chill from that night. I've never again slept in an isolated area, and to this day, whenever I catch a reflection in glass, I look away. Story 5. I'd been hauling freight between Arizona and Texas for nearly 15 years, and by then I'd seen just about everything on the road. That night, I was cutting through New Mexico, near a tiny town called Vaughn. It was close to 3 a.m, and a sandstorm had just passed. I decided to stop at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, just an old pump, a closed diner, and a bathroom lit by a flickering yellow bulb. I parked the truck, left the engine running to keep the air moving, and leaned back in the seat to rest for a bit. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to a strange sound coming from the cab radio. It was that kind of static you get when flipping frequencies, but underneath the noise, I could make out a voice, low, weak, asking for help. I sat there listening until the words became clear. "Can anyone hear me? I need help." I figured it was interference from a CB or some other trucker in trouble. I grabbed the mic to answer, but the line was dead. Then the radio turned itself off. I stepped out of the cab, trying to convince myself it was just static. The wind was strong, and the station looked even more deserted than when I'd arrived. The only light came from a payphone mounted on the diner's wall, one of those old metal ones with a coiled cord swaying in the wind. It was ringing over and over, a metallic echo mixing with the howl of the desert air. I stared at it for a few seconds before picking it up, just to prove it was nothing. The moment I pressed it to my ear, the sound of the storm vanished completely. I heard heavy breathing very close, and then a voice, my own voice, speaking clearly. "Get back in the truck." I froze, dropped the phone, and ran back to the cab, heart hammering. I slammed the door, locked everything, and sat there, trying to process what had just happened. The wind rattled the metal siding, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I reached for my cell to call my wife just to hear another human voice, but there was no signal. Then the cab radio, which I could have sworn I'd turned off, crackled back to life. The static was louder now, like someone was fiddling with the mic. Between the bursts of noise, I heard it again, my voice, same tone, same accent, saying, "You shouldn't have left." A wave of panic hit me. I started the truck and pulled out fast, tires skidding on the gravel. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the payphone still swinging, as if someone had just let go of it. I drove for nearly an hour without looking back, trying to convince myself I was just overtired, maybe dreaming with my eyes open. But when I finally stopped at the next rest area, I noticed something that froze my blood. The clock on the dashboard read 3:03 a.m., the same time blinking on the radio display, even though it was turned off. By morning, I stopped at a bigger station. People around, sunlight, noise, just to calm my nerves. I went in for coffee and asked the clerk if the old gas station down the highway still operated at night. He gave me a puzzled look and said that place had been closed for nearly 10 years, after a fire burned part of the shop and left the property abandoned. He even showed me a news article on his phone. The photo was unmistakable, same sign, same rusted gas pump. I went back to my truck shaking. When I climbed in, the radio was completely dead, no wires connected at all. And yet, for just a second, the screen flickered to life, and my own voice came through again, hoarse and distant. "Get back in the truck." I shut everything off, left the radio where it was, and never took that route again. Even today, whenever I drive through New Mexico, I take a 50-mile detour, just so I never have to see that station again. Story 6. My name is Laura, and I live in a small town in rural Oregon with my 8-year-old son. At the time, we had just moved into this modest little house with a backyard, the kind of quiet place where the neighbors are far apart, and the sound of rain is constant. That night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from outside. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking something against the gate, but the sound was rhythmic. 3 sharp knocks, a long pause, then 3 more. It sounded deliberate, like someone tapping their foot against the wood. I got up slowly, trying not to wake my son, and walked to the kitchen. The curtains were half open, and the dim light from the street lamp illuminated part of the yard. When I looked out the window, I saw a man standing in the rain, his back to me, completely still. He was wearing a dark hooded coat, and the water was streaming down his shoulders. For a moment, I thought he might be a drunk neighbor, someone lost, but something about the way he stood there, not moving even an inch, froze me to the core. I stepped away from the window and tried to steady my breathing. The knocking had stopped, but I could still hear the heavy rain and the wind moving through the trees. I grabbed the kitchen phone and quietly dialed the police. I explained what was happening, that there was a man standing in my backyard, and asked them to send someone right away. As I spoke, I heard a new sound, a faint creak, like the gate being slowly pushed open. I ran to my son's room and shut the door. He was still asleep, but I could feel my heartbeat pounding so hard it seemed loud enough to wake him. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to make out what was happening outside. After a few seconds, I heard slow footsteps in the wet grass coming toward the house. I held my breath. The steps stopped right by the kitchen window. No movement, no sound, just the rain drumming on the roof. I stayed perfectly still, trying to tell whether it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I grabbed my cell phone and texted my neighbor, asking if she could see anyone in my yard. She lived 2 houses away and replied almost immediately, "It's dark, but it looks like someone standing near your kitchen window." My stomach dropped. I texted back that the police were on their way and asked her not to make any noise, just to watch if the man moved. A moment later, I heard a faint tapping on the glass. 3 soft knocks. Not loud, just the kind of gentle tapping someone might do with their fingertips. I knew he was right there, pressed against the window. I hid in the bedroom closet, holding my son tightly as he slept, trying not to make a sound. The tapping stopped, but the feeling that he was still out there, watching, was almost physical. Time seemed to stop, and every second made my whole body tingle with fear. When I finally heard the distant sound of a siren, a wave of relief hit me so hard my legs started shaking. I waited to hear footsteps in the yard, but nothing happened. The flashing lights from the patrol cars glowed through the cracks in the window, and only then did I leave the room. I went to the front door and shouted that the police could come in. 2 officers stepped onto the porch and asked what had happened. I told them everything: the noise, the man standing in the rain, the knocking on the window. They went around to the back with their flashlights, and I stood in the kitchen, watching through the window. The beams of light cut through the darkness, illuminating every corner of the yard. I waited to hear something, but after a few minutes, the officers came back and said there was no one out there. The gate was still locked from the inside. One of them asked me to show him the way to the gate, and when we went there, we saw the footprints in the mud. They started at the gate and went straight to the kitchen window. There were no prints leading back. One officer crouched down and shone his light closer. He said they looked recent but were already partly covered by the rain. He asked if I had any animals or anyone who might have come into the yard, and I just shook my head, unable to speak. He tried to reassure me, saying it was probably someone who had jumped the fence and left another way, but there were no other tracks going anywhere else. Just that short path, from the gate to the window, and nothing more. After they left, I tried to go back to sleep, but the sound of the rain seemed louder than before. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the crack under the door, imagining that man standing outside, still, silent, listening to every breath I took. When the sun came up, I went down to the kitchen. The window still had faint streaks of mud as if fingers had slid down the glass. I washed it off, keeping my eyes fixed in that direction the whole time, haunted by the feeling that if I blinked, I'd see a face watching me from the other side. During breakfast, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but my son asked why there were so many footprints in the yard. I told him the police had left them when they came to check, even though I knew those prints were already there before. The day dragged on, and every time I looked out the window, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. By late afternoon, I went back to the gate to check the lock. It was still secured, but the chain looked more worn, as if someone had forced it and then put it back. That night before bed, I left all the backyard lights on. I lay down with my phone in hand, the ringer volume at maximum. The rain had returned, and with it came the same dull, heavy fear from the night before. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the soft creak of the gate again, but this time no footsteps. I waited, frozen, heart racing. Nothing else happened. When morning came, I looked out into the yard. The gate was still locked, but now there was a single clear footprint right by the kitchen window, facing toward the house. Story 7. I only stayed in that motel out of necessity. I was driving back home after visiting my mother and ended up stopping there late at night. It was the only place open in the area, and the clerk seemed more interested in going back to watching TV than actually checking me in. The room was simple, a bit damp, smelling of mildew with the constant hum of an old air conditioner. I just wanted a few hours of sleep before getting back on the road. Around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up to a rhythmic sound coming from the wall. At first, I thought someone was accidentally hitting it, maybe a loose headboard. But the noise persisted, deliberate. 3 quick knocks, a long pause, then 3 more. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was still raining outside and the parking lot was completely empty. When the knocking continued, I decided to go to the front desk and complain. The manager looked exhausted and didn't even lift his eyes from the counter when I mentioned the noise. He just said, "That room next to yours is empty, ma'am. No one checked in there tonight." I thought he was lying to avoid dealing with it, so I pressed the issue. He sighed, grabbed an old key, and reluctantly followed me down the hall. The light above flickered, and the carpet smelled strongly of dampness. When he unlocked the door to the room next to mine, a rush of cold air came out, even though no windows were open. The TV was on, tuned to static, the white noise filling the entire room. The manager walked over and unplugged it, but the static continued for several seconds before finally fading out. That's when I noticed a suitcase against the wall, clothes inside still wet, as if someone had just come in from the rain. The manager frowned and said he'd checked the logs to see if a guest had switched rooms without telling anyone. I went back to my room, trying not to look at the foggy mirror in the hallway. Once inside, I left the TV on for background noise and tried to sleep, but the knocking started again, this time closer, coming from the wall behind the bed. It sounded like someone rapping with their knuckles, deliberate, with short pauses between each set. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. On the other side, something scraped, a dry sound like fabric dragging across the floor. I went to the phone and called the front desk, but no one answered. I stood there in the middle of the room, unsure whether to leave or stay. The air felt colder, and the TV began to hiss again, even though I had nearly muted it. I turned it off and sat on the bed, staring at the mirror on the wall. In the reflection, I swear I saw a shadow move quickly in the back of the room, as if someone had passed in front of the window. But the curtain hadn't moved at all. My heart pounded as I sat frozen, staring at the wall, waiting for the sound to return. The clock on the nightstand read 3:07 a.m. when I heard it again. Only this time, The knocks came from under the bed. A muffled sound, slow and spaced, almost like someone breathing and shifting against the carpet. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight, but the battery was at 2%. I crouched down slowly, my heart hammering, and shined the light beneath the bed. I saw only the bed frame's shadow, and a pair of wet slippers that weren't mine pushed far back. I ran to the door, but the latch was stuck. I yanked it until it gave way, then sprinted straight to the front desk. The manager was gone. Behind the counter, there was a clipboard with the guests' names, but my room number was crossed out in red ink. When I came back with another night clerk, the noise had stopped. We entered the room together. The floor where I'd seen the slippers was dry, but the air still carried the faint smell of damp clothing. The new clerk said someone had probably broken into the next room and promised to call the police in the morning, though I could tell he didn't really believe me. We locked up, and he told me to try to get some rest. Once everything went quiet again, I realized the faint sound of TV static had returned, coming from the room next door, the one that was supposed to be empty. It was soft, constant, like the volume had been turned down just enough for me to hear it. I lay on the bed, too afraid to turn off the light. Every creak in the building sounded like it came from the wrong side of the wall. Around 4 o'clock, I heard a toilet flush from the room next door, the same one that was vacant. I jumped up, listening hard. Water ran for a few seconds, then stopped. A moment later, my room phone rang once, and just a single ring. When I picked up, all I heard was breathing, slow, heavy, on the other end. That was when I decided to leave before sunrise. I packed as fast as I could and went downstairs to drop off the key. The lobby was empty, so I left the card on the counter and headed for my car. As I passed the next room, its door was slightly open. A faint light leaked through the gap at the bottom, and I could hear the sound of a TV coming from inside. The number on the door, 107, was faded, the paint peeling. I was almost to my car when I heard, very softly, 3 knocks from inside. The exact same rhythm as the night before. I got in my car and drove off without looking back. A few miles down the road, I finally stopped at a gas station and took a deep breath. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I noticed my hair was damp, and the smell of mildew still clung to the jacket I'd left on the bed. Since that night, I've never stayed in a roadside motel again. Sometimes I still dream about that static, and I wake up certain someone's knocking on the other side of the wall. Story 8. Back then, I worked traveling through small towns across Kansas, always driving long distances at night to avoid traffic and enjoy the silence. It was one of those endless flat highways, miles and miles of nothing but dark fields and faded road signs. The GPS started to glitch, the signal dropped, and I just kept going with nothing but my headlights and instinct. That's when I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder, its trunk open, hazard lights blinking slowly. I slowed down, thinking maybe someone needed help. But when I got within about 20 meters, the lights suddenly went out. No movement, no shadow. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to see beyond the dim reflection of rain in my headlights until that strange, gut-deep discomfort hit me, the kind that tells you not to get out of the car. I pressed the gas and kept driving. In the rearview mirror, the car seemed to take shape again, only now it was behind me, following without headlights. For a moment, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe someone who'd started their car at the same time. But the faster I went, the more it matched my speed, keeping the exact same distance. Sometimes I could barely see its outline, just the occasional glint of light when a road sign reflected off something metallic. The road was completely empty. No exits, no farms, just wet asphalt and the sound of my tires slicing through water. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. After about 10 minutes, fear turned into full-blown panic. I switched off my headlights for a second to see if the car would disappear, but it didn't. It was still there, a dark shape keeping up. I turned on my hazard lights, hoping to catch someone's attention, but there was no one else around. When I saw a sign that said exit 2 miles, I decided to take it. That was the biggest mistake of the night. I veered off onto a narrower side road lined with trees and distant light poles. The car behind me did the same without hesitation. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew someone was watching me. The dashboard lights felt brighter than usual, like the car was closing in on itself. My pulse was racing and every instinct screamed, "Keep going, don't stop, don't let it get close." After about 5 minutes, I spotted a 24-hour gas station sign and thought that would be my escape. I swerved into the entrance fast. The wet asphalt reflected the pale glow from the convenience store, and for a moment I thought I was safe. I parked facing the glass storefront and watched the mirror. No headlights behind me, no movement, just the rain falling and the hum of my engine as I tried to catch my breath. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the empty lot. A trucker walked into the store, and that gave me a false sense of comfort. I thought about telling him what happened, but it sounded too crazy, even to me. When I finally turned off the car, I saw something that froze me. The reflection in the store window showed movement behind my vehicle, like someone had just run past. I turned instantly, but there was nothing there. The attendant gave me a strange look when I walked in. I asked if he'd seen a black car parked on the road, and he shook his head. "You're the first person to stop here since 10 o'clock, he said. I glanced back through the window. Outside, the puddles rippled in the wind, but there was no other car. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew that car had followed me. I bought a coffee just to have something in my hands and stood by the window watching the rain. The store's ceiling fan hummed, the only steady sound, and every time it clicked, I turned thinking someone had come in. When I finally decided to leave, I thanked the clerk and went back to my car. The gas station lights cast long shadows across the puddles, and for a split second, I thought I saw a dark figure standing still near pump number 3. I blinked and it was gone. I got in quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. The radio, which I was sure I'd turned off, crackled with static, like it had picked up a faint signal. The digital screen flickered, showing for a moment, "No route," then switched on by itself with the message, "Reconnecting GPS." I looked forward, and in the reflection of the windshield far down the road, a single headlight appeared. Dim, moving toward me, then vanishing again into the rain. I pulled out of the station as fast as I could. The road felt darker after the artificial light. I kept the high beams on and the radio off, listening only to the engine and the rain drumming on the roof. At every curve, I checked the mirror, and once I swear I saw 2 headlights suddenly flare up in the distance. I kept accelerating, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When the city lights finally came into view, I slowed down and looked behind me again. The highway was empty, no headlights, no car. I parked in front of my building and sat there for a few minutes, trying to decide whether to go inside or circle the block one more time just to be sure. I got out, shaking, and the first thing I did was check the rear bumper. There were fresh mud prints, like someone had pressed their hands there. The next morning, I took the car to a mechanic. I told part of the story, trying to sound rational, saying maybe someone had followed me by mistake. He called me over to show me something. On the lower corner of the bumper, there was a circular mark, metallic, right in the center, like something had been pressed hard against it. He said it looked like a tow hook fitting, but there were no drag marks or scratches, as if it had just been held there for a few seconds and removed. Since that night, I've avoided driving late, especially on empty highways. Sometimes I still think about that car, about the moment the GPS reconnected by itself and the light appeared again through the rain. I don't know if someone was really following me, if it was coincidence or something I'll never understand. But I know what I felt. The absolute certainty that, for a few miles that night, I wasn't alone on that road. Story 9. I used to live in one of those old apartment buildings in Seattle. Narrow hallways, flickering yellow lights, and the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat. I rented a small unit on the 8th floor because it was cheap and close to work. But the place felt strange from the very beginning. The janitor lived on the ground floor and I almost never saw the other tenants. It always seemed like the building was half empty. After a couple of weeks, I started noticing a pattern that I first thought was pure coincidence. The intercom rang every night, exactly at 3 a.m. At first, I ignored it. I assumed someone was pressing the wrong button or that it was just electrical interference. But after the 3rd night in a row, I decided to answer. On the other end, there was no voice, only a slow, steady breathing and a metallic scraping sound like someone running a sharp object close to the microphone. I asked who it was, but the sound just grew louder until it suddenly stopped. I hung up and stood there for a while, trying to understand what I'd just heard. The next night, the intercom rang again, right on schedule. This time I set my phone to record the audio while I answered. The same breathing, the same scraping, like metal scratching against the mic, as if someone were dragging a key along it. After a few seconds, a faint, guttural whisper came through. I couldn't make out the words, only a suffocated murmur. When I played back the recording, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. The noise started 2 seconds before the intercom rang, as if it had already been transmitting before I picked up. The next day, I talked to the janitor. He said no one else had complained about late-night calls and that the security panel showed no records of activity at that hour. I asked to see it myself, and he pulled up the screen. Everything looked normal. No calls between 2 and 4 a.m. I suspected he was hiding something, so I bought a small camera and mounted it near my door, aimed directly at the intercom. That night, I stayed awake to watch. I sat on the couch with the TV on mute just to keep the room dimly lit. When the clock hit 3, the sound came, the sharp buzz of the intercom, 3 spaced rings. I immediately checked the camera feed on my phone. The button was being pressed, clearly moving in and out. But there was no one there, no shadow, no movement, nothing that could explain it. The button just depressed and released as if an invisible finger were pushing it. Then the metallic noise returned, louder this time, and I swear it came from inside my apartment, not from the entryway downstairs. I pressed my ear to the wall where the wire ran and could hear it, the same scraping sound, but on the other side. The feeling was unbearable, like someone was digging their way in. I switched off the intercom's circuit breaker and silenced it. Yet half an hour later, it rang again. The next morning, I went downstairs to speak with the building manager, an elderly man who'd lived there since the place was built. I showed him the video, trying to stay calm, though my hands were shaking. He watched quietly, then said he needed to show me something. We went into a small maintenance room where the main intercom panel sat, an old metal box filled with colored wires and decades of dust. He pulled out a clipboard and showed me the maintenance records. According to them, my apartment's intercom had been disconnected for over a month, long before I moved in. I thought I'd misheard him, but he pointed to the severed wire still hanging loose from the panel. "There's no power going to your intercom," he said. "No connection line, it shouldn't be ringing at all." We stood there for a few seconds, just listening to the distant hum of the elevator. Back upstairs, I tried playing the recording again, but this time the video file was corrupted. Only the audio remained. The breathing, the metallic scraping, and now an echo in the background. Faint, rhythmic, like another intercom ringing far away. That night I couldn't sleep. I unplugged the intercom completely and left it on the table far from the wall. But at exactly 3 a.m. the sound started again. Not the ringing this time, but the scraping, coming from inside the device itself. I picked up my phone and started recording, my hand trembling. When I brought the microphone close to the intercom, the recording caught a short, distinct whisper. "I'm down here." I left the apartment the next morning and never went back. A few days later, the manager called me. He said that when they removed the intercom from the wall, the wire was still cut. But inside the metal conduit, they found fresh rust marks, as if a new wire had been threaded through and then removed again. No one ever figured out how. Even now, whenever I hear a phone ring in the middle of the night, I feel that same chill crawl up my neck. And I wait a few seconds before answering, just to make sure it's not the same sound I heard that night. Story 10. That night the wind was fierce, the kind that makes windows rattle and branches scrape against the walls. I live on an old farm in Iowa, inherited from my father, and I'm used to strange noises, especially during autumn nights. Still, when I heard the barn door slam, it was loud enough to pull me out of bed. I looked out the window and saw the yard lights flickering in the wind. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on a jacket, and went outside. The barn sits about 50 meters from the house, an old red wooden structure with a rusted roof. The cold wind bit at my face and the ground was still damp from the previous day's rain. When I reached it, the door was swinging back and forth, slamming against the frame. I latched the iron bolt, the same one we'd always used, and stood there for a few seconds, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks. Everything seemed fine, but as I started walking back to the house, I heard it again, The dull thud of the door swinging open. I turned around, irritated, thinking the latch must have come loose in the wind. The flashlight trembled in my hand from the cold, its beam cutting through the dusty air. When I reached the entrance, the door was slightly ajar, creaking. I kicked it gently, ready to bolt it properly this time, but froze when I saw the latch still in place, locked tight. The door was secured from the outside, and yet it had moved. I stepped back, trying to process what I was seeing. The wind was blowing from the opposite direction. There was no way it had pushed it open. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard a faint, rhythmic sound from inside. 3 soft knocks, as if someone were gently pushing the boards from within. I called out, asking if anyone was in there, but the noise stopped. A few seconds passed. Nothing. The silence that followed felt wrong, like the wind had gone distant all at once. I hesitated, heart pounding, then unlatched the bolt. The wood was cold and damp, and for a moment I thought about just going back to bed and checking in the morning, but something in me needed to see. When I pushed the door open, the smell of wet hay and old oil hit me. The flashlight beam barely cut through the dark, showing only the hanging tools and the outlines of empty stalls. I walked in slowly, hearing the floor creak under my boots, calling out again. No answer. The wind outside picked up, rattling the roof and making the hanging ropes sway slightly. When I aimed the light toward the back, I noticed something odd. The plastic curtains covering the grain storage area were moving, even though there was no draft inside. I went closer and pulled one aside. Nothing, just stacked feed bags. But when I turned to leave, the sound came again. 3 knocks, louder this time, from the barn door I'd left open. I ran to the entrance and saw that the door was now completely closed, the latch locked from the inside. That was impossible. I had left it unlatched. I tried to force it open, but the wood held firm. Instinctively, I started banging back, shouting to know if anyone was there. My pounding echoed through the barn, then everything went still, except the sound of my own breathing. And then, from the other side of the door, came the dry sound of fingernails dragging down the wood, slowly, from top to bottom. I stepped back and shone the light on it. The marks were appearing right in front of me, fresh, as if being carved in real time, thin scratches inching downward. That's when I realized they were on the inside of the door, and I could see them forming through the gaps. I took another step back, unsure whether to open it or run. The wind outside suddenly stopped, and the barn fell completely silent, except for the faint drip of rainwater from the roof. Acting on impulse, I unlatched the door and shoved it open. The wood groaned and cold air rushed in. I swung the flashlight around and fast, when expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Only the fresh claw marks on the inside of the door, some so deep they had splintered the wood. The floor nearby was covered in sawdust and dry mud, but in the middle of it were clear handprints, pressed deep into the dirt, as if someone had braced themselves there, pushing hard. The sight made my chest tighten. I left the door open and sprinted back to the house, locking every entrance behind me. I sat in the living room with the rifle across my lap, listening to the wind howl outside. When morning came, I went back to the barn in daylight. The marks were still there. Only now the handprints looked deeper, as if the wood had given way overnight. The strangest thing was the thin layer of dry soil scattered inside, coming from somewhere I couldn't trace. Since that night, I've never locked that door again. I'd rather leave it open, just to be sure nothing ever tries to come out of there again.
Thank you for staying until the end of this video. It's amazing to have you here accompanying me until the end of the stories. If you liked it, leave your comment telling what was the story that moved you the most. And if you are not yet registered, sign up so you don't miss the next ones. Until next night of scary stories.